Thank you for joining me on this executive functioning journey that we've been on over the last several weeks. If this is your first episode on this topic, I invite you to go back to the beginning of this series. 4 weeks ago, we talked about what executive functioning is. 3 weeks ago, I gave you 10 activities that involve writing or drawing that we can do to strengthen our kiddos' executive functioning skills. 2 weeks ago, we talked about activities involving building. And last week, we had 10 activities to strengthen our kiddos' working memory. This week, our last 10 activities are involving games, which if you know anything about us here at Starfish Social Club, you know that we're all about games. So these are 10 activities that you can build into game time to help your kiddos with their executive functioning skills. Here we go. Next up is how I incorporate executive functioning skills into games. Clearly, games in and of themselves work on executive functioning skills. There's not a game out there that does not work on executive functioning skills just by the fact that it's a game. There are extra things I do during game time that kick things up a notch, sometimes a little, sometimes a whole lot. Number one, never have I ever. This just means that the group or the partnership, however many kids there are, picks a game that no one in their group has played before. At Starfish Social Club, we have lots of games. So there are definitely games that kids have not played before because we tend to kind of default to the same ones over and over. So it's the easiest activity on this list is a game we've never played before. Often I will get kids who say, well, I don't know how to play it. And I respond with something like, when you were 3, did you know how to read? And we talk about that the only way to learn new things is for someone to teach us or for us to try them and do them. That's how we learn new things. Number 2, what if? This just means playing a common game in a different way. Our kids who are super creative love this activity. And our kids who are rule followers do not, do not love this activity. That's all it means is, let's say that a group picks checkers. Those 2 students get to decide how to play that game in a different way. That can have multiple meanings. It doesn't even, there's no right or wrong answer to that. Just how could you play that game in a different way? We've even had kids do things like play sorry going backwards, right? We have 2 older kids who just started doing that completely on their own. They just started playing sorry together every week, but they play it backwards. That's a great example of that. What if we played it this way? What if this game was like this? If you think about if you found a game and it had no directions and you never played it before, what would you do? How would you play it? Number 3 is new sheriff. For this activity, every student who's playing that game gets to make up a new rule. So if it's a 2-player game, you have 2 new rules. If it's a 4-player game, you have 4 new rules. Our favorite game here at Starfish is a 6-player game. If there are 6 students playing it, we have 6 new rules. This could be things like, I'm going to use sorry because it's the easiest example to use. You can't bump people out, could be a rule. Every time you get a 1, you have to go backwards 1, could be a rule. You can't slide on the slides, could be a rule. You can only have 1 pawn out at a time, could be a rule. Everybody gets to make up a new rule. The challenge for this one comes in remembering the rules that everybody made up. So sometimes we write them down. We've also had times where kids all made up their own rules and then realized that the game was no longer playable because the rules they made up conflicted with each other or kept the game from being able to progress. So we have had that happen as well. Even in Sorry, at one time they had a rule that if you knock out another player, you also have to send one of your own pieces back to start. So there's all kinds of fun, cool ways you can play this activity. It's just funny to see when the kids realize that the game can't function with the new rules that they made up. Number 4, this is specifically for those of us who work with groups, is sometimes I will assign kids to game groups. In general, at Starfish Social Club, kids can play with whomever they want to. We don't assign games, we don't assign groups, they can do whatever they want to. Sometimes I will assign them just to reinforce cognitive flexibility, just to reinforce kids playing with people they don't usually play with. One of the cool things that happened a few weeks before I'm recording this is right now in our lessons, we're doing a lot of conversation skills and we do a lot of role play and practicing. I intentionally paired kids together in every one of our lessons that were different so that they were not used to having a conversation with each other. And that way they would really have to focus on the things that we were talking about and learning. That week, probably 80% of the 2 kids I have paired together then went on to play together during game time, which was totally unexpected and was not even my intention. I was just trying to make sure they weren't kids who normally hung out together so that they could actually really work on their conversation skills. But once they made that connection, they made that connection. So that's been really cool, is helping kids group themselves differently, partner themselves differently with kids that they just don't normally choose or don't normally play with. And it created some long-term groups and partnerships. Number 5 is Game Smash. There are some days, especially in the summer when I do a lot of these types of challenges for the kids, there are honestly some days where I come here and have no idea what my plan is for that day. Probably most days I come in and have no idea. And then this idea just pops into my brain. Most of these things that are on this list are things that just the universe downloaded into my brain 5 minutes before game time started. This is definitely one of them. Game Smash is where everybody in the group, our game times have as many as 15 kids. Everybody in the group goes and picks a game. Whatever game you want, everybody go get a game and then bring it back into the main room. So everybody's standing around with a game. The next step is to find a partner. So 2 students, 2 games, and figure out how to play both games. This can look one of 2 ways. Most kids choose to try to integrate the 2 games together. How can we play both of these games? We have no requirement here that kids play games by the rules. So we have lots of kids, especially our younger kids, that creative play and pretend play with pieces from games. So a lot of times that's what ends up happening when they do Game Smash, is they just completely make up a new game using pieces from both games. Another option is to actually play both games within the allotted time. This tends to be our older kids and our kids who tend to be more rule oriented. So they will set a timer and play one game for half the time and the other game for half the time. That works too. Number 6, you and me, kid. This is a really good way to help kids who tend to be really cognitively stuck ease into game time. This is where I have 2 people be partners during game time, not opponents, partners. Again, I'm going to use the game Sorry because everybody knows it and it's 4 people. It's the easiest example to use. Instead of 4 people playing against each other, 2 kids on opposite sides of the board are partners and 2 kids on the other side of the board are partners. That means that when it's their turn, they and their partner decide what move to make. You can also do this where they're both the same color instead of being different colors. You can do this with Uno. You can do this with Monopoly. You can do this with anything. We've had 4 kids playing checkers before because they all 4 wanted to play and we only have 1 game. So they play as partners. We've had the same with Connect 4. The beauty of having kids play with partners, well, there's a few benefits to this. One is the communication. They are not allowed to make a move unless both people agree to it. So one of the features is the communication piece of it. The other is just being able to listen to another person explain their perspective and point of view. And no one person wins or loses. The partnership wins or loses. If you are doing this with an adult as a partner or a more socially flexible peer as a partner, it's also really great modeling for if your partnership loses or wins. Because the adult or the more socially flexible peer will do a great job modeling how to act if we lose or if we win. And it's a great example for your kiddo who may be less flexible to see. Number 7, Freaky Friday. This is another one that I just totally made up one day, but it was really fun. Everybody got to choose their group, their game. Once they got set up and started, I started a timer. I would do about 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, I would say is a good time frame for this activity. Every time the timer went off, they had to trade pieces, cards, whatever, with someone else in the game. They didn't have to move if they didn't want to move. But for example, if they were playing Uno, they had to pass their cards to someone else, which could mean just rotating around the circle if there were a lot of kids playing. If they were playing Sorry, they would have to become a different color and take over for that person. So we're not starting the game over. The game continues as is, but now every student is a different color or piece than they were. I set this up similar to the drawing activity to where everybody ends up back at the same piece, character, player, whatever that they started with, except the card games, because those aren't always a rotation. And it changes so much during the game anyways. But things like aggravation, sorry, trouble, chess, checkers, whatever, I end it to where every student ends with whatever color or piece they started with. King or Queen Me. This is another one I totally made up. Everybody comes into the group and I randomly pick 2 kids, and those 2 kids go and pick a game. Each one of them picks a game. And when they come back to the group, everybody else can choose which one of those games they want to play. If you have a group larger than 8, you may need to pick 3 kids. If you don't have that many kids, maybe you just start with 1. When I was doing this, we would have about 8 kids in a group at a time. So 2 people was ideal. The person who picked the game is in charge of that game. We would do this for about 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, that student is in charge of that game. They get to decide They got to pick the game. They get to decide who goes first. They get to decide if there's any disagreements about the rules. They get to pick their color first. They get to be in charge of the game. When the timer goes off, I pick 2 more kids. If you have more than one game going on, I pick a kid from each game. Those kids get to choose whether to continue playing the game they're playing or whether to put that game away and grab a new game. And then they are in charge, and everybody else decides which game they want to play for the next 10 minutes. And now that student's in charge for 10 minutes. Timer goes off. I pick more students. Those kids get to decide whether to keep playing the game they're playing or to go get a new game and start something new for 10 minutes. The reason I started doing this is really because of our kids who are more socially laid back. They don't always stand up for themselves. They will go with the flow, which means they're usually never picking a game. They're just joining a group. They're usually never speaking up for what color they want to be. They just go with whatever's left over. They don't speak up if they want to go first. They just end up where they end up. So this was my opportunity to give them 10 minutes of being king or queen, where they are in charge of the game, and vice versa, to give our kids who have more dominating personalities a chance to sit back and let things be. Teaser alert. Okay. Not that you know what it means anyways. Number 9, new in town. Another one I totally made up that day. This was also back when we usually had about 8 kids in a group, but you can do this with any number of kids. It works best if you have more than one game going on. If you have a small group, I would suggest having 2-player games so that you can have more than one game going on. Chess, checkers, Connect 4, Battleship, those are all pretty classic 2-player games. The way I set this one up is everybody found a partner or a group and decided on a game. It does work best if all of the games have the same number of players. So if you're doing 2-player games, every game is a 2-player game. If you're doing 4-player games like we did, every game is a 4-player game. And you'll see why that matters. Set the timer. Every time the timer went off, I would randomly pick one student from each group, and they had to change places. So let's say you have a Connect 4 group and a Battleship group and a chess group. You would pick one student from each game, and they had to move to a new game. When the timer goes off again, you pick the students who have not moved yet, and they move to a new game. And you just keep doing that. When I did it, we had games that were 4 people. So it was just a constant back and forth between different games. With the groups of 4, it really mixes up who the students are playing with. With the groups of 2, they can manipulate it to where they're almost always playing with the same kid, at least every other time. But with the groups of 4, it really mixes up who's playing together, especially if you have more than 2 games. Number 10, fruit basket turnover. This is the culmination of all the other things on here with game time. This is the most chaotic, intense, executive functioning mess I have ever made, but it was so much fun. Similar to number 9, everybody organizes themselves into groups, picks a game. This time when the timer goes off, the entire group moves to a new game. So again, you need to have the same number of players in each game, 2-player games, 4-player games, etc. The entire group gets up and moves to a new game. They can either completely start over, or they each take a seat and play with wherever things are in that game, whether it's Uno and they're just picking up a random hand of cards, or it's sorry and they're just all deciding what color they're going to be, or it's Connect Four and they're deciding which color each one of them is going to be. But fruit basket turnover is where every time the timer goes off, the entire group gets up. We have 3 rooms here, so it worked really well because we had a game in every room. The entire group gets up, moves to a new room, just completely starts over with a new game or continues the game. I also ended this one to where every group ended the activity back at the game they had actually chosen. My favorite thing about these game activities is that on the days that we did this, I did them in the summer last year. Every week I would pick one of these and I went through the progression of easiest to hardest. Here at Starfish Social Club, our students have about 40 minutes where we do organized and structured games. And the last 20 minutes or so, they can really have more free play. We have marble towers, we have magnetic tiles. They can kind of choose what they want to do. Even after the 40 minutes was up and they could make a different choice, probably at least 80% of the time, they kept playing one of the games that was part of this activity, or they kept playing with the person they were playing with that wasn't somebody they normally would have played with. That was really, really cool. And it goes to show how much exposure to things that are new and different just activates our brains and helps us do things that are new and different again and again, and how quickly we can acclimatize to things that are new and different.